So Nikki Haley is in trouble due to her comments about what caused the Civil War. Let me give her a little bit of assistance. How's everybody doing? My name is Anthony Brian Logan, and today we got to talk about former governor of South Carolina and current GOP presidential candidate Nikki Haley getting into some trouble due to her comments about what caused the Civil War. Now, let's set the scene. She's at a town hall type event in New Hampshire, trying to become the president, and then someone in the audience asks her, hey, what caused the Civil War? Now, she gave a response for about a minute and a half, and the person in the audience is like, hey, you didn't mention the word slavery one time. What's going on with that? So, of course, the news media picked up on it. Social media picked up on it. It's pretty much gone viral, and she is in some trouble. Now, if she were to say slavery, just that one word, and leave it there, she would not be in any kind of trouble. None whatsoever. There would not be a big fuss or uproar. That answer would be accepted. But if she does that, that would be disingenuous at best, because yes, slavery was the chief individual issue aside from the bigger things going on like states' rights. That was the chief issue, but to just leave it out there and say slavery would be incorrect, because when the average person hears that, they're going to think the North, quote unquote, fought the South, quote unquote, to free slaves. That would be false. That'd be dead wrong, 100% wrong, because both sides of the war had slaves throughout the entire war. The issue with slavery was more about controlling it and expanding it. Abraham Lincoln himself said if he could maintain the Union without freeing slaves, he'd do it. The individual liberty, the freedom, the rights of slaves was not the question. The question was the economics and the federal government control of slavery. Now, before I go any further, let's get into the actual clip. If you want to see the clip in full without my commentary, link, as always, will be in the description. If you're on IG, visit a link in the bio, go to the corresponding article on the website. But without further ado, let's go ahead and roll it.
Front. Nikki Haley is in New Hampshire tonight making her case to voters. She's been doing this repeatedly. She was asked tonight, just a few moments ago, by a voter about what was the cause of the Civil War. This is how she responded.
What was the cause of the United States Civil War?
Well, don't come with an easy question or anything. I mean, I think the cause of the Civil War was basically how government was going to run, the freedoms and what people could and couldn't do. What do you think the cause of the Civil War was? I'm sorry?
I'm not running for president. I want to see your view on the cause of the Civil War.
I mean, I think it always comes down to the role of government.
So you heard that. The person said, in 2023, it's astonishing to me that you would answer that question without mentioning the word slavery. Okay, let's keep on going.
What do you want me to say about slavery?
No, you've answered my question. Thank you.
Next question.
Now, it's not your average town hall question, but she did seem surprised by it. And the voter, as you could hear there, called her out for not mentioning slavery. What do you make of that answer?
Yeah, if I were her, that would have been pretty easy to just say that and move on. But it's also, I think, pretty clear that that voter was kind of trying to catch her and saying something that would potentially make her less appealing to those independent voters.
Of course, it was a gotcha moment. Probably somebody sent there by Democrats or whoever, because it's kind of easy at a certain point to get so many people hemmed up, to get them caught up and to saying things that they may think they can't say. And in reality, she could have really expressed herself a little bit more. I'm not quite sure if she's educated on the topic or not, but we're going to get into it in a minute. Y'all hang tight.
In New Hampshire that she's going to rely on so heavily. So this was an easy question to answer. I wish she had answered it using the easy word, say slavery. There's a disagreement in our country about it. But ultimately, I don't think it's actually going to hurt her standing one way or another with Republican primary voters at this point.
front.
All right, so that's it. That's what happened with Nikki Haley over there in New Hampshire. Somebody asked her what caused the Civil War in the USA, and basically she said states' rights. Now, that really is the correct answer, but it's not a complete answer. And if you're going to be a politician in this country, you got to give the complete answer. You got to mention slavery, because slavery, again, that was the chief individual issue, aside from the bigger issue of states' rights and federalism, things of this nature. Let me just go back a little bit and explain. You see, prior to now, and definitely prior to the Civil War, the United States was more about individual states doing their own thing. The U.S. was more like Europe, the way Europe is now. You have small countries, but they're individual sovereign countries. The idea of a federal government atop of all European nations is not really a thing they embrace. I mean, there's a European Union, but not all countries are in the EU. There was a famous Brexit because they didn't like what the European Union was doing. And even the EU does not have the control, the power, the leverage that the federal government in the U.S. has. Before Civil War, we were not really buying into the idea of federalism. It was about individual states doing whatever they wanted to do. And sometimes there would be little conflicts between states, little wars between states, because again, each state was like its own thing, especially after 1776. There's no more Kingdom of Great Britain. We're our own thing as individual places, not as one country under a federal government. Now, there was a lot of different things going on before the war broke out and before the secession, because that's the main thing. The Confederacy broke away from the Union to create CSA, Confederate States of America. They had their own country, Union were their own country. Abraham Lincoln comes in and wants to reunify. And again, I say, he said if he could reunify the nation without freeing slaves, he'd do it. The individual liberty of slaves was not the question. The question was economics, power, federal government control. That was the main thing. And of course, the big economic power, the driving force behind the nation was slavery. The North came about and they got more into manufacturing and things of this nature as time progressed, as we get later into the 1800s. But still, the lifeblood of the economy was cotton, was slavery. That was the reality. Now, let's talk about the North or the Union. If someone wants to say that the Union fought the Confederacy to end slaves, well, you got to explain why there were 5 states in the Union with slaves throughout the entire war, or for the majority of the war. And you have Kentucky, Missouri, Maryland, where else? Kentucky, Missouri, Maryland, West Virginia, and there's one more I'm forgetting. You guys let me know what that final state is. Oh, Delaware. 5 states in the Union with slaves during the war. And I can kind of encapsulate this story and put a bow on it by telling the story of my home state where I was born, where my family was enslaved in West Virginia. I could tell that story. That'll give you a bigger picture about what's happening here and about what the war was really about. Again, it was not about the individual liberty of my ancestors. It was about states being able to do things and control things. It was more about government and politics. That's what it was about. Now, West Virginia, the war starts in 1861. At this point, there is no West Virginia. There's just Virginia, just one state. For a very long time, going all the way back to the American Revolution, 1776, West Virginia, or really the counties in the far western part of the state, once you get to the Blue Ridge Mountains in west, they wanted to secede from Virginia because they were being ignored. A lot of your economic opportunity was happening on the East Coast, where I grew up. I was born in West Virginia, but I grew up in Virginia on the East, Norfolk, Virginia Beach. You had the military right there. You had the federal government in D.C. not too far away. You had shipbuilding and ports and the slaves with the cotton and the farming. All that action was happening on the East Coast. The western part of the state was being ignored. It's far away. It's mountainous. To drive, because I've made a drive before, to drive from Norfolk to Charleston, West Virginia, it's about 6.5 hours if you put and don't stop and you go 100 miles an hour. And that's with modern roads, cars. So imagine how far that journey would have been in the 1700s with no cars, no roads. It'd be a very, very difficult trek to make. So often they got ignored. So they were not successful in seceding into West Virginia in the 1700s. So during the war, they saw opportunity to secede from Virginia and create West Virginia in 1863 during the war. Now, remember, Virginia is the capital of the Confederacy, and they're a slave state. West Virginia, or the counties in that part of the state, also had slaves. They did coal mining, as my ancestors did, salt mining, everything else. So they secede from the Confederacy, from Virginia, create West Virginia, and they go into the Union during the war with slaves. Now, when they do this, Union soldiers from Ohio come into West Virginia and say, hey, check it out. We know you guys have slaves, and that's fine. If any of your slaves escape into Ohio, we will bring them back to you, because we have a law that says no fugitive slaves in Ohio. You see, a lot of slaves, when they escaped, they had to go all the way to Canada, like Nova Scotia, somewhere like that. And in New York, where they had slavery as well, up until like the 1830s, there was a commission of white men who created Liberia. And the purpose was to expel blacks from the states back to Africa. That's what that was. And of course, what happens when they go back to Africa? There's conflict, because they do the exact same thing the white man did to them in America, oppress native populations. Okay, now you got a conflict in Africa that happens. My point is this: for the quote unquote North to claim moral high ground over the South for slavery is ridiculous. And if Nikki Haley, says that the war was about slavery and leaves it there, that gives the moral high ground to the North when there is a moral high ground. We got to just zoom out and look at it for what it was. It was not about individual liberty of slaves. It was not about trying to free them. It wasn't about the North trying to be the rescue rangers and free the Southern slaves. It wasn't about that, because both sides had slaves. It was more about control. It was more about power. It was more about states' rights than anything else. And a big piece of all this was the idea of slavery. Who can expand it? Who can make money on it? That is the appropriate answer here, CNN and Nikki Haley. But I think I'll leave that right there for now. And what say you? What do you think caused the Civil War? Was it the North trying to free the Southern slaves? Was it about states' rights? Whatever your thoughts are, let me know in the comments below. You guys know where I'm at. This was a states' rights issue, but it's deeper than that. When somebody says it was about slavery, okay, now let's get a little bit deeper. When someone says it's about states' rights, okay, now let's get a little bit deeper. You can't not mention slavery, but you also can't not mention states' rights. You got to mention both. You have to mention both. If you leave out either one, you're not giving the full story. You're giving the answer that may appease somebody who wants to hear a certain thing, rather than telling the full and complete truth. But whatever your thoughts are, please let me know in the comments below. And that's all I got to say for this video. If you like what you heard, please comment, rate, share, and subscribe. Peace.